London, 1852. The iron gates of Stanhope House stood exactly as Lucy remembered them, towering, cold, and as unyielding as they had seemed on the night she crossed them for the last time. Back then, the clang of metal closing behind her had echoed like a sentence passed. Now snow rested quietly over the gardens, softening what once had been too harsh to face. Benjamin held her hand in a tight, earnest grip, his wide blue eyes fixed on the mansion rising before them like a sleeping giant. He was only 3, yet he already carried the quiet gravity of Ethan Stanhope, the same determined chin, the same attentive stillness, as if the world demanded too much of him far too soon. Lucy felt her chest tighten. It was impossible not to see it, impossible to pretend the boy beside her didn't carry everything she had lost. "Mother," his small voice broke the silence. "Is this the big house?" She nodded, unable to trust her own voice. Music drifted from the glowing windows. The Christmas ball, as lively as on the night her mother-in-law had handed her that forged letter, her smile never quite reaching her eyes, a lie crafted with cruelty and patience. Lucy pulled the worn shawl closer around her shoulders. She had not come to beg. She had not come to plead. She had come to reveal. And she had chosen this night deliberately, a night when half of England's aristocracy would stand as unwitting witnesses. For a moment he faltered. What if Ethan saw the boy and didn't recognize him? The doubt stung, but Benjamin squeezed her hand again, calling her back to herself. She drew a steady breath and pushed the gate open. Its groan sliced through the winter air, rough, almost mournful, as if the house itself was stirring awake for what was about to unfold. There was no turning back now, only the road she had carved for herself, and the courage, at last, to walk it. If you too cherish period stories, those that whisper like old letters and echo like longing hearts, leave your like and subscribe to the Countess's Tales. Your support allows these narratives to cross oceans and reach more souls around the world. And before you go, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. It's always enchanting to discover how far our stories travel. Lucy Dorset had been Duchess of Stanhope for only 2 years, though those days now felt as though they belonged to another lifetime entirely. Born into a respectable family, yet one with no real influence, she had learned early how to move quietly through drawing rooms that never truly welcomed her. And when Ethan Stanhope chose her, Ethan the solemn-eyed duke with restrained, careful gestures, Lucy believed, if only for a breath, that she had finally found a place where she could breathe. But the air thinned quickly. The Dowager Duchess, Lady Constance, had never accepted the match. Her silences cut far deeper than her words, and it was within those frozen gaps that Lucy realized just how fragile her place truly was. The absence of an heir only sharpened the judgment. Every time Ethan left on business, Lucy remained behind, exposed to the calculating gaze of her mother-in-law, an expression that seemed to measure every flaw she might possess, whether real or imagined. When the Duke sailed for America, promising to return before year's end, Lucy tried to believe him. He wrote to her, she wrote back, but the letters vanished, as if the ocean had swallowed their voices whole, until the last one arrived. "Our marriage is over. Leave and do not return." The handwriting was his. The cruelty was not. Under Lady Constance's quiet command, the house closed in around her. The housekeeper looked away as she collected the brooch Lucy had worn on her wedding day. The butler stood rigid as the doors locked behind her. Lucy crossed the courtyard with a single small trunk and a future that felt heavier than the cold biting at her skin. In Ireland, far from everything that had wounded her, Benjamin was born, and with him, a thin but steady thread of courage. There, among mist-soaked fields and the scent of burning peat, Lucy discovered that she could begin again, even in pieces. 4 years later, she was coming back to London, and there could be no better night to drag the truth into the light, before the very same people who had accepted a lie as if it were solid ground. Chapter 1. The Quiet Return. The side entrance of Stanhope House lay empty. It was through that modest door that Lucy had slipped away 4 years earlier, her heart drained, and her single small trunk feeling heavier than the world itself. Now she walked the same path again, not as a fugitive, but as a woman finally brave enough to claim her own story. Benjamin walked beside her, his small hand anchored firmly in hers. They followed the narrow corridor where servants hurried past with trays and flickering candles for the Christmas ball. No one recognized her. In her plain dark wool dress, she could have been one of them. The music swelled as they advanced. Benjamin clutched her hand, nervous. Lucy bent toward him and murmured, "Stay close. Don't let go." He nodded, half hiding his face in the shawl she had wrapped around him. The little coat Sophie had sent from Kent hung too large on his small shoulders. The memory of her sister's letter, "I'll be there. Look for me in the ballroom," became a thin thread of courage she held tightly. They reached the access door to the main hall. Lucy paused behind a column and looked out. The ballroom was exactly as she remembered. The crystal chandelier spilled liquid light over the polished floor. Deep burgundy velvet framed the tall windows. Ladies in silk and taffeta spun like drifting petals. And at the center of it all, radiating her usual quiet authority, stood Lady Constance Stanhope. Black velvet, silver embroidery, a posture carved from stone. The Dowager Duchess looked like a monarch presiding over her own kingdom. No one there would ever dare question her word. Old anger stirred in Lucy, and for a moment the air burned in her lungs. That woman had dismantled her life with meticulous coldness. "Mama," Benjamin tugged at her skirt. "I'm cold." It wasn't the cold. It was fear. Lucy knelt and wrapped her arms around him. "You'll be safe." "I'm right here." Benjamin looked up at her with that solemnity that hurt to see, a seriousness inherited from a father he had never met. "Are we going to see Papa?" The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. But before she could answer, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Lucy?" She turned slowly. Sophie stood there, beautiful in pale green silk, her eyes wide. In an instant, she closed the distance and pulled Lucy into a trembling embrace. "You came." "My God, you truly came." Lucy gripped her sister's shoulders, grounding herself. "I need you to stay with Benjamin just for a few minutes." Sophie lowered her gaze and saw the boy. Shock passed over her like a fleeting shadow. "Lucy, he looks just like his father." "Yes." Lucy's voice was low, steady. "And this house will no longer pretend otherwise." Benjamin hesitated before letting go of his mother's hand and giving it to his aunt. That small gesture stole a breath from Lucy, but she lifted her chin. "Stay by the window, don't come forward until I call." Sophie nodded, her voice tight. "This will be a scandal, but whatever happens, I'm with you." Lucy touched her hand for a heartbeat, and then stepped into the room. Each step seemed louder than it should have been. Familiar faces turned, ladies whispered behind their fans, gentlemen frowned, calculating the weight of a sudden scandal. "It's her... the Duchess! I thought she'd been exiled." Lucy walked on without flinching, though her heart pounded hard enough to break her ribs. The last time she had crossed that ballroom, doors had slammed shut behind her. Now she crossed it to open every truth those doors had buried. Lady Constance turned and froze. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across her expression. Not fear, but close. Then the mask slid back into place. Lucy stopped just a few steps away. The music stuttered. A few musicians lost the beat. The conductor lifted his hand. Silence settled. "Lady Constance," Lucy said, her voice calm but sharp as cold iron. "I believe we have unfinished business." The Dowager lifted her chin. "You should not be here." "No, I am the Duchess of Stanhope. This house is still my home." "It was," Constance corrected, crisp. "You abandoned your husband and the duty you swore to uphold." A murmur rippled through the ballroom. Lucy felt the weight of judgment pressing against her ribs, but she did not retreat. "I did not abandon him," she said, louder now. "You cast me out." This time the ballroom reacted in waves, shock, disbelief, hushed voices rising like wind through leaves. Constance opened her mouth, but the voice that cut through the room did not belong to her. "Lucy?" She turned, and the world drained of color. Ethan Stanhope stood a few paces away, pale as marble beneath the chandelier's glow. His blue eyes, so painfully familiar, were wide, almost wounded. His hand opened, then closed again as though the body reached for her before the mind allowed it. He looked thinner, tighter, worn by years she had not witnessed. But he was still Ethan, the man she had loved, the man she believed had rejected her. Lucy felt her breath falter. Ethan stepped forward. "You," his voice was low, fractured. "You came back." Chapter 2. The Ghost of the Past. Ethan Stanhope could not believe what stood before him. For 4 long years, he had grown accustomed to the idea that Lucy existed only as a painful memory, the wife who had betrayed him, who had abandoned him, who had vanished without a trace. He had given her his name, opened the doors of Stanhope House, and she, so he'd been told, had chosen to walk away without looking back. He had searched for her. In those first months he sent men to Bath, where her mother lived, to Kent, to any place where someone whispered they had seen a fair-haired woman with a delicate face that resembled hers. Every man returned empty-handed, and slowly the voice of his mother, spoken with the devotion of a dark prayer, settled into him. She chose to leave, Ethan. Some women cannot bear the weight of a title. She abandoned you. And yet now, she was here. Standing in the center of the ballroom, beneath the warm glow of candlelight, with the same face he had once known better than his own. Her brown eyes were darker now, her hair pulled back without ornament, her simple dress worn at the hem, clashing almost violently with the silk and taffeta spinning around her. Nothing about her looked like the Duchess of Stanhope. And still, Ethan saw no one else. "Why have you come back?" "After all this time?" he asked, unaware the words had escaped. The question sounded pitiful even to his own ears. Lucy didn't answer. She only looked at him. In her gaze he found no trace of the tenderness that once convinced him he'd finally found a home. What he saw instead was heavy, shadowed, pain, anger, an unspoken accusation that made him want to step back. "Ethan!" Lady Constance's voice sliced through the silence like a thin blade. His mother stepped forward, positioning herself just slightly ahead of him, as though her body alone could shield him from a ghost. "Do not let her unsettle you," she said, cold and controlled. That woman was your daughter-in-law," Lucy cut in, her voice steady enough to make several nearby guests flinch. "That woman was thrown out of this house while you poisoned your son's heart against her." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Ethan felt the hair rise at the nape of his neck. He turned to his mother, seeking the same familiar certainty that had steadied him through every storm. But all he found was marble. "She is lying," Constance said, her tone unchanged. "She left of her own accord. She wrote letters, Ethan. You received them. You know." "What letters?" Lucy stepped forward. Ethan saw the faint tremor in her hands, the sharp gleam in her eyes. The tremor looked less like fear than fury held tightly. "The letters you intercepted. The ones you forged in my name." The world narrowed to the small circle of light around the three of them. The ballroom faded. The guests faded. Everything faded. "What are you talking about?" His voice sounded foreign, rough. Lucy met his gaze at last, and in that moment he saw the wound. Not the delicate sorrow of a fragile woman, but something raw, torn open, the kind of pain that struck like a physical blow. "I wrote to you," she said, each word landing heavily. "I wrote nearly every day while you were in America. I begged you to come home. I told you I was alone here. I pleaded with you not to believe rumors, and none of those letters ever reached you." Ethan parted his lips, stunned. "That's not true. I received one letter. You said you no longer wanted—" He swallowed hard, remembering the sting of those lines. "You wanted freedom. You couldn't bear being a duchess." Lucy shook her head, the certainty in her denial so absolute it stole his breath. "I never wrote that." Her voice faltered on the last word but did not waver. "I never asked you to leave me. She drew a shaky breath. "I loved you." The past tense struck him like a nail driven straight into bone. Slowly, as though wading through water, he turned to his mother. Mother. Lady Constance raised her chin, as if her very spine refused to bow. I did what was necessary, she said. Her conviction made several guests straighten, as if hearing a verdict. She did not adapt. 2 years, Ethan. 2 years without an heir. Frail, sickly, always in tears. This dukedom demands more. I had to protect our name. Protect, Lucy's voice rose, echoing against the gilded walls. You destroyed a life to protect your pride. The murmurs sharpened, harsh, cutting. Ethan could no longer separate words from noise. He heard only scandal, horror, impossible. You did this? He whispered to his mother. For the first time in his life, he did not recognize the woman before him. You interfered with our letters. You ordered her thrown out. Constance did not blink. I did what you lacked the courage to do. That marriage was a mistake from the beginning. She was never suitable. I told you so before the wedding. She had no strength, no vitality. I was pregnant. The 3 words crashed through the ballroom like thunder splitting a cloudless sky. For a heartbeat, nothing moved, not a breath, not a sound. Ethan felt his knees weaken. What? The question barely formed. Lucy inhaled and tears glimmered in her eyes, quiet, controlled, refusing to fall. When I was cast out of this house, I was only a few weeks pregnant. I didn't know yet. I learned later, alone in Ireland with a distant cousin with no resources. Her voice caught. Without you. Without you. The words landed like a blow to the ribs. Ethan brought a hand to his chest, as if he could keep the world from collapsing inward. Pregnant. She had been pregnant. And one dazed, childish thought formed, then there was a child. A child. My child. Where? His voice failed. He tried again. Where is this child? Lucy did not answer right away. She glanced aside, just slightly, and made the smallest gesture. Ethan followed her eyes. Across the ballroom, a young woman he recognized only after a moment, Sophie Dorset, Lucy's younger sister, walked slowly toward them, leading a small boy by the hand. The world disappeared. The child looked 3, perhaps 4 years old. Dark hair, softly tousled, a broad, thoughtful forehead that stabbed through Ethan with painful familiarity. The line of the jaw, his own jaw. But it was the eyes that struck deepest. Blue, clear and unbroken, exactly the same shade as his. The boy stopped beside Lucy, clutching the edges of his coat, nervous but observant. This is Benjamin, Lucy said softly, yet the entire ballroom seemed to hear her. Your son. The word fell like a stone between them. Son. Ethan couldn't move. His limbs refused obedience. He stared at the boy as if the child might vanish if he blinked too quickly. His son. A son who had taken his first steps far from him, who had spoken his first words without him, a son raised believing his father did not exist, or worse, did not want him. Heat burned behind Ethan's eyes, sharp and unbearable. He clenched his hands to hold himself together. He turned to his mother. You knew? He asked, his voice low but shaking with a rage he had never directed at Lady Constance. You knew she was pregnant when you drove her out. The colour drained from the Dowager Duchess's face. She left, she insisted, stiff. She refused her duty. How was I to— Don't lie, Ethan snapped, louder than he intended. Several guests jumped at the sound. He almost never raised his voice. You sent her away, without telling me, without even sending her back to her family. You cast her from this house, pregnant. The words echoed, followed by a silence heavier than any previous murmur. A slight movement at the edge of the circle drew his eye. Robert Finch, the butler, stepped forward, slowly, pale as powdered gloves. He bowed with a trembling stiffness. Your Grace. His voice broke. He cleared his throat, visibly shaken. Forgive me, Your Grace. There are matters that were never confessed. Matters I should have spoken of sooner. Ethan looked at him, fury simmering. What matters? He demanded. Speak, Finch. The butler swallowed hard. His gaze flicked to Lady Constance, searching one last time for protection. He found none. She remained rigid, lips drawn tight. "The letters, Your Grace," he whispered. "Some did not reach you by my hand." Gasps rippled around them. Ethan's stomach clenched. "You're telling me you lied to me?" he asked, each word scraping his throat. "That you withheld correspondence addressed to your Duke?" Finch shut his eyes briefly, bracing for impact. "I did as I was ordered," he said, barely above a breath. "But I cannot. No, I can no longer bear the weight of it." The floor seemed to shift beneath Ethan's feet. Lucy was looking at him again. Her eyes held no triumph, only exhaustion, only a grief too old to contain. He stepped toward her, one pace then another, before stopping, afraid to come closer. "Lucy." His voice broke. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I never knew about the letters or the child. If I had known—" She closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a quiet path down her cheek. When she looked at him again, the pain remained, but something stronger braced it. "Now you do," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room like a bell. "And now everyone here knows as well." The candlelight flickered. And for a moment, Ethan felt the unmistakable truth. His life as he had known it had just collapsed, before the eyes of all of London. Chapter 3. The Weight of Truth. Lucy felt her legs weaken for the first time that night, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of everything that had just happened. Whispers cut through the ballroom like a cold wind. An heir. 4 years. Hidden. The Dowager Duchess. Was it her? Each word split the air, but Lucy kept her chin lifted. Tears would only be allowed to exist once London was no longer watching. Her first instinct was to look for Benjamin. He still stood beside Sophie, his small hands clutching his aunt's skirt, his eyes wide with fear at the sudden explosion of voices. His breathing came fast, like a cornered little animal, his body far too tense for someone so young. The surge of maternal worry shook Lucy out of her daze. She had to get him out. She needed silence, 4 walls and a locked door, somewhere her son would not be displayed like evidence in a trial, but before she could move, Ethan did. He stepped forward just enough for the candlelight to fall fully across his face, and in that instant, there was no doubt left. He was shattered. His hands trembled slightly at his sides, and his gaze, fixed on Benjamin, was that of a man who had discovered a treasure far too late. "Lucy." His voice failed. He drew in a breath as if trying to gather scattered pieces of himself. May I speak with him?" Her heart beat slow and heavy. Part of her wanted to say no with all the force of 4 years of abandonment, to throw back at him every cold night, every silence she had endured alone. But between Ethan and herself there was another life now, a boy who deserved more than her anger. "He doesn't know you," she said at last, quiet but steady. "He doesn't know who you are." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, like a man receiving a sentence too just and too painful to protest. "I understand." He hesitated, his voice thinning. "If you won't grant me anything else, let me at least look at him. Just for tonight." Lucy turned. Benjamin saw her and immediately held out his arms, asking to be carried. She lifted him, feeling the familiar weight against her chest, the simple scent of Irish soap mingled with nervous sweat. That small body was the only reason she was still standing. "Mama, I want to go home," he whispered, hiding his face against her neck. Lucy held him tighter. "I know, my love. We'll leave soon." Sophie stepped closer, touching Lucy's arm lightly. "Let me fetch you some water. You're pale," she said, before sending a look toward Lady Constance that could have frozen iron. The Dowager Duchess remained motionless near the center of the ballroom, her face carved in stone. But there was something new in her eyes, a hairline crack, a glint of fear where only absolute control had lived before. Ethan took a step toward them. Benjamin shrank back slightly, curious but wary. "Who is he, Mama?" the boy whispered. Lucy searched for words that would neither wound nor lie. "He is," she began, but the sentence caught, trapped between past and present. Ethan sank to one knee. It wasn't theatrical. It was simply a man needing to come down to the height of a life he had met far too late. "I'm your father, Benjamin," he said softly, his voice breaking near the end. "And I am so sorry I haven't been with you until now. I didn't know. I didn't know you existed." Benjamin studied him for a long moment, far too serious for his age, as if trying to fit this new piece into a puzzle that was still almost empty. Then he turned to Lucy, asking for confirmation with his eyes. "He's crying," the boy murmured, puzzled. Lucy stroked his hair gently. "Because he's very happy to see you." Benjamin seemed to think about that. Then, with the simple, devastating clarity only children possess, he asked, "Are you going to live with us now?" The question fell like stones into still water. Lucy felt it hit her chest. So did Ethan. His gaze met hers, holding a question, a plea, a promise that dared not form fully. There was no possible answer. And that was when, as if choosing the worst possible moment, Lady Constance moved. "This is outrageous," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut through half the conversations at once. "Do you all truly accept this farce? A woman disappears for 4 years and returns with some child plucked from anywhere?" Sophie, who had just come back with a glass of water, stepped forward before Lucy could stop her. "Anyone with eyes can see that boy is a Stanhope," she shot back, cool and clear. "The eyes, the chin, even the way he stands. You should be ashamed to suggest otherwise." A murmur swept through the room, shock, whispered agreement, quiet approval. Lucy watched Lady Constance pale, not from remorse, but from controlled fury. Yet the Dowager Duchess did not answer Sophie. She ignored her as one might ignore an insolent maid. Her gaze stayed fixed on Lucy, eyes that once inspired dread and obedience, now simply tired from holding up an empire of lies. Lady Charlotte Prescott, a friend from Lucy's old life, emerged from the crowd with a strained expression, her gloves twisted between her fingers. "Lucy," she said, barely above a whisper, I was wrong. I should have listened to you. I should have questioned it. Forgive me." Lucy heard the truth in that apology. She gave a single nod, not grand, but enough to loosen something in Charlotte, who began to cry in silence. Ethan rose to his full height. When he spoke, his voice was no longer unsteady. It was the voice of a duke. "This child is my son," he declared, "and Lucy was my wife. Everything she has said, my mother." He drew a breath, steadying himself. "Planned against us." Lady Constance did not retreat at once, but her lower lip trembled, a fragile human detail in a face that had always seemed carved from marble. "I protected this name. I protected you," she answered, her voice low and rough. "That marriage was doomed." She produced no heir. She was too fragile for her station. "She was pregnant," Ethan cut in, his tone so tightly controlled that silence fell again. "And you drove her out." For the first time, Lucy saw Constance falter. A small step back, a quickened breath, hands tightening inside silk gloves. Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper, stepped forward, visibly nervous. "Milady, perhaps we should withdraw. This can be settled more suitably in private rooms." An escape. Her way to retreat with some scrap of dignity. Constance hesitated just for a breath, perhaps weighing the eyes around her, measuring what power she still held. Then she lifted her chin, obeying the old reflex that never allowed her to bow, and left the ballroom without looking back. The aristocracy parted to let her pass. No bows followed her, only a corridor of silence, as though she were already a ghost walking through her own house. Benjamin shifted in Lucy's arms, spent. "Mama, can we go home now?" "Yes, my love," Lucy said, finally feeling exhaustion settle into every bone. "We're going now." Ethan stepped forward, not to stop her, but to offer something that belonged to both their past and whatever future might exist. "There are rooms prepared. The blue room is empty. You can stay tonight, at least." He paused. "My mother will not come near you. You have my word. And Miss Sophie may stay with you, if you wish." Lucy met his eyes. There was truth there, hurting, uncomfortable, but real. "Only for tonight," she replied. Sophie took her arm, ready to go with her. Before Lucy could leave, she heard Ethan call her name one last time. Lucy. She stopped without turning around. "I will put this right," he said, his voice low and weighted. "I don't yet know how, but I will." Lucy closed her eyes for a brief moment. Once, promises had been beautiful things, before they broke. Without answering, she walked out of the ballroom, Benjamin in her arms, Sophie at her side. Behind her, the Christmas ball dissolved into whispers. This was no longer just a scandal. It was the beginning of something no one in that room would be able to contain. Chapter 4. The Abyss of Guilt. The ballroom was empty. The echoes of the waltz had faded. The last candles flickered like weary spirits, and the silence left behind by the departing guests felt heavier than the marble beneath Ethan Stanhope's feet. He stood motionless at the center of the great hall, staring at the staircase where Lucy had disappeared moments before. Benjamin, his son, sleeping in her arms. His son. The word refused to settle within him. It was a brutal light flung into a darkness he had accepted for too long. Truth cut at him from every angle. The first steps, the first words, the nighttime terrors, the fevers, everything that should have been part of his life as a father had unfolded in another home, far from him. Stolen not just by someone else's hand, but because he had chosen to believe without question. He only realized he hadn't breathed when his fingers began to ache from clenching too tightly. "Ethan," Lady Constance's voice broke the silence. He turned slowly. The Dowager Duchess stood near a column, her hands clasped, her black velvet gown absorbing the faint light. Her posture remained impeccable, yet something was different. A slight tremor in her shoulders, a careful lift of her chin, as if even that familiar gesture cost her now. "Do not speak to me." His voice came low but sharp. Constance's jaw tightened. She stepped forward. "How you must understand." "Understand?" His voice didn't rise, but it carried through the empty hall with enough weight to echo. "What exactly should I understand? That you expelled my pregnant wife, that you intercepted letters, paid servants to lie, that you stole my son." Constance's breath hitched, barely but enough. "I acted for the good of the dukedom, for your good," she insisted, trying to reclaim the authority she had always wielded. 2 years, Ethan. 2 years without an heir. I feared she was pregnant. Each syllable landed like a verdict. Pregnant, and you cast her out like an inconvenience. Color drained from Constance's face, though she didn't step back. "I did not know," she said, her voice roughened. "When she left, I did not know. You did not want to know." Ethan advanced a step. "You decided she was unworthy and discarded her. You never cared what I felt, much less what she felt." Something flickered across her face, not full remorse, but the shadow of it. It vanished quickly. Silence stretched like a heavy curtain. Then hurried footsteps sounded from the corridor. "Ethan?" The door swung open, revealing Patrick Stanhope, dusty with road grime. He looked as though he had ridden without rest, hair disheveled, face damp with sweat, eyes somewhere between stunned and frantic. "When did you arrive?" Ethan asked, forcing his breathing steady. "Minutes ago." Patrick stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the ballroom, trying to understand the strange stillness. Guests were leaving, saying impossible things, that Lucy returned, that there's a child, that... He glanced at Constance. "That you lied." The Dowager Duchess looked away. Ethan inhaled, bracing himself for the truth he would now speak aloud. "They're not impossible. They're true." Patrick staggered, as if struck. "Good God! I was in France when she left. You wrote that she abandoned you. I believed it." "So did I," Ethan murmured, shame roughening his voice. "Because I trusted our mother. Because I chose to believe she would never do such a thing. Because I didn't want to see beyond what was convenient." He dragged a hand down his face. The letters didn't vanish on their own. Correspondence was taken, servants bribed, every step calculated. Patrick turned to Constance, horrified. "How could you?" She lifted her chin, clinging to the armor she'd worn all her life. "I did what was necessary to protect the lineage. A title is not preserved through sentiment. You are both too young to understand." "Too young?" Patrick stepped closer, anger rising. "Destroying a marriage, separating a man from his own child, that is not protection, it is devastation." Constance did not respond. The silence that followed was not one of respect, but of fracture. Ethan's body weakened. He walked to the nearest chair and sat, burying his face in his hands. The image of Lucy climbing the stairs with Benjamin cut through him like a blade. Benjamin, the son he should have held, the son who should have spoken his name, the son who had looked at him without knowing who he was. "Someone outside said the boy looks like you," Patrick murmured gently, stepping near. Ethan closed his eyes, and this time tears came, silent and unrestrained. "I missed 4 years of my son's life, Patrick, 4 years. How do I begin to mend that?" "This isn't about blame," Patrick said softly. "You were deceived, just as she was. What was taken from you wasn't by your choice. But what you do next, that is a choice. Rebuilding won't erase the past, but it can shape the future, one day at a time." Before Ethan could answer, Mrs. Hartley appeared hesitantly at the doorway. "Your Grace." She dipped her head. "Lady Lucy and young Master Benjamin are settled in the blue room. The child is asleep. Lady Sophie remains with them." Ethan stood almost instantly. "Did she ask for anything? Does she need anything?" The housekeeper shook her head. "She only requested that she not be disturbed tonight." The blow was deserved, and it hurt. "See that they have everything they require," Ethan said, steadying himself. "And Mrs. Hartley, tomorrow, when we speak, I expect the complete truth." "From everyone." Her eyes shone with guilt as she nodded and withdrew. Patrick looked at their mother with disbelief and sorrow intertwined. "What will you do now, Mother?" The Dowager Duchess's expression hardened into the familiar mask. "I will retire to my chambers. Clearly anything I say here is unwelcome." Ethan met her gaze. The raw heat of anger had cooled into something sharper. Decision. "You will retire to the widow's house," he said, each word deliberate. "Not here. You will keep your distance from Lucy and Benjamin, and you will not approach them without my explicit permission." Constance blinked, genuine shock flashing across her face. "Ethan!" "And tomorrow," he continued firm, "when society asks, you will not say Lucy fled or abandoned me. You will tell the truth. She was unjustly expelled, and you will add no further lies to the damage already done." Constance opened her mouth, a protest forming, but something stopped her. Pride, perhaps, or the instinct of someone who knew her reign had ended in one night. "As you wish, Your Grace," she said, her voice cold. She swept from the ballroom, her gown dragging like an old shadow. No servant hurried to open the door for her. The dull sound of wood closing behind her seemed to mark the end of a long and silent monarchy. Ethan collapsed back into his chair. For a long while, neither brother spoke. Finally, Patrick said quietly, "You still love her." Ethan let out a humorless, broken breath. "I always did. I don't know if she can ever look at me again without remembering what she suffered because of our mother. But I'll try." He closed his eyes. "I don't know what else I can do." Patrick nodded slowly, his jaw tight, but his expression warm with solidarity. "Then do what must be done," he said softly. "And Ethan?" Ethan lifted his eyes. "You're not alone in this." "Not this time." Patrick squeezed his shoulder once before stepping back. "I'll leave you to rest," he murmured, "or at least try." He slipped into the corridor, the door closing softly behind him. Ethan drew a long, steady breath. Midnight pressed heavily over the house, over him, over everything. Lucy was upstairs. Benjamin slept in some quiet room lit by gentle candlelight, and he, Duke, brother, son, husband, now father, stood at the edge of an abyss. But for the first time in 4 years, he knew which direction he needed to walk, and that path, however long, would begin at dawn. Chapter 5. Fragments of Hope. The blue room had not changed. Lucy sat at the edge of the canopy bed, watching Benjamin sleep beneath the linen sheets that once belonged to her former life. The sky-blue silk walls, the golden scrollwork, the soft fire casting shadows across the ceiling. Everything was exactly as she remembered. Only she was no longer the same. Against her will, she remembered the last night she had slept in that bed. The shy hope that Ethan would return from America before winter, the forgotten teacup on the table, the cold slipping in through the half-open window. It felt strange, almost unreal, to have the past breathing so close after 4 years of absence. Benjamin sighed in his sleep, his small chest rising and falling with the peace she had fought so hard to give him. He had fallen asleep after asking questions that cut deeper than any public accusation. Who is he? Why was everyone looking at me? Can we go home? Now he slept deeply, unaware of the scandal his very existence had unleashed. Sophie sat in the armchair by the fire, a cup of tea long gone cold resting in her hands. She hadn't taken her eyes off Lucy since they came upstairs. "Are you all right?" she asked at last, her voice low. Lucy let out a shaky breath. "I don't know. I feel so many things at once that none of them seem to have a name." Sophie rose and came to sit beside her, gently taking her hand. "You were brave tonight." Lucy gave a faint, disbelieving laugh. "Brave? My knees could barely hold me. I thought I'd faint in the middle of the ballroom." "But you didn't," Sophie replied with quiet conviction. "You walked with your head high. The truth is on your side, Lucy. And tonight, people finally saw it." Lucy lowered her gaze. Courage or desperation? It was hard to tell the difference. "And now?" she asked, her voice small, almost childlike. "What happens now?" Sophie hesitated. "What do you want to happen?" The question struck harder than Lucy expected. She had come to expose Constance, to drag the truth into the light of London. But she hadn't looked beyond that, hadn't imagined Ethan's face when Benjamin spoke to him, or the knot inside her when she saw him kneel before their son. "He looked destroyed," Sophie murmured. "I've never seen Ethan like that." Lucy closed her eyes. She had seen it and felt it. Something had cracked inside her, and something else had begun to move, small and unwelcome, but painfully familiar. "He didn't know," she whispered. "All this time, he never knew." "Because his mother kept him blind," Sophie answered, bitterness sharp in her voice. "What Constance did is unforgivable." Lucy said nothing. She didn't disagree. But the anger that had fed her for so long was breaking into smaller pieces now, hard to keep whole. A soft knock at the door pulled them from their thoughts. Sophie opened it just enough to reveal Mrs. Hartley, carrying a tray with hot tea and biscuits. The housekeeper seemed smaller in that gentle light and older. Her hands trembled slightly, almost imperceptibly. "I thought you might like something warm," she said quietly. Sophie took the tray, but Lucy stepped closer when Mrs. Hartley lingered on the threshold. The woman avoided her eyes. Her face was far too pale for a simple, sleepless night. "Thank you," Lucy said, tired kindness in her tone. Not because Hartley deserved it, but because someone had to offer it. "I know this has been a difficult night for everyone." Hartley swallowed, fingers tightening in her apron. "Difficult. And deserved, milady," she answered softly. "I was here when you left, 4 years ago. I didn't help Lady Constance. But I didn't help you either. I said nothing. Did nothing." She drew a breath as if pulling the words from somewhere deep. "I was afraid of her, and that fear still lives in me." Lucy's expression softened. The tremor in the woman's voice, the retreat, the silent shame, everything made sense now. "Fear governs more people than cruelty ever could," Lucy said gently. "But we are not under her rule anymore, Mrs. Hartley." "Not tonight." The housekeeper closed her eyes for a moment, as if those words eased a very old weight. "Thank you, milady." She curtsied deeply and left, walking faster than someone who wished to stay. When the door shut, Sophie watched Lucy for a moment, then let out a sad little smile. "You've always been too generous," she murmured. Lucy frowned lightly. "For thanking her for tea?" Not just for that. Sophie sat beside her again. Even after everything, you still speak to people calmly. You still treat everyone with respect. You didn't let bitterness swallow you. I don't know if I'd have that kind of grace. Lucy sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Resentment is heavy, Sophie. And I already carry enough. Sophie nodded slowly, finally understanding the quiet strength beneath her sister's composure. Lucy, she ventured, careful, do you still love him? Ethan? The question hung between them like a candle on the verge of going out. Lucy looked down at the cup, at the thin steam rising and dissolving into the air. I loved the man who went to America, she said, the words difficult. But I don't know who he is now. 4 years change everything. He's going to try to make this right, Sophie replied. I saw it in his eyes. Lucy drew a breath that almost hurt. I know. Her voice was barely more than a thread. But nothing that happened can be undone. The sleepless nights, the fevers, the first steps he never saw, the loneliness of another country. She swallowed hard. I don't blame him for those things, Sophie. I truly don't. But they still happened. And sometimes I wonder if there's any us left that can survive what lies behind us. Maybe not the old us, Sophie said softly, but perhaps something new. If he proves he deserves it. Lucy looked over at Benjamin. He shifted in his sleep, letting out a small sigh as he burrowed into the sheets. The shape of his chin, the slight furrow of his brow. It was Ethan in miniature, and it hurt in a strange way, full of tenderness and loss. She tucked the blankets more snugly around him and kissed his forehead. Sophie set a hand on her shoulder. You're not alone anymore, Lucy. I'm here, and I believe Ethan wants to be too, but the choice is yours. Lucy nodded slowly. For the first time in 4 years, pain wasn't the only thing inside her. There was room, the smallest, most fragile space, for something else. Perhaps hope, a fragile, transparent thing, thin as glass and just as easy to break. But still, hope. Sophie left the room at last, moving quietly down the corridor toward the chamber Mrs. Hartley had prepared for her. Outside, snow kept falling, wrapping Stanhope House in a stillness that seemed to protect rather than conceal. Lucy let exhaustion and the gentle warmth of the fire pull at her. Perhaps the winter of her life had gone on long enough. Perhaps she was allowed to wish for a beginning. She had no answers. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself one silent question. What if there is a future? And with that thought, she drifted into sleep where she sat, her hand resting over her son's, as if, in that simple touch, she held the entire thread of hope in the world. Chapter 6. The First Step. Just before dawn, a murmur at the door had pulled him out of his daze. Robert Finch, the butler, had appeared in the doorway, pale, trembling, his eyes hollow with a weight he had carried for far too long. He hadn't asked to sit. He hadn't tried to excuse himself. He had simply confessed, letters diverted, orders given by the Dowager Duchess, doors closed that should have remained open. The meeting lasted minutes, not hours, but long enough for Ethan to realize that part of the truth had been under his roof all along. When Finch finally left, silent, the only sound the faint crackle of the dying fire, the night seemed to grow even longer. Morning crept over London, seeping in as a pale light through the heavy curtains of the study. Ethan still sat in the leather armchair where he had remained after Finch left, watching the fire burn itself out, as if he were witnessing the end of a world. Lucy was alive, and there was a boy, his son, sleeping several floors above. His son. The word was too big to fit inside his chest. It pressed against every nerve, every memory, every regret. When the first ray of sunlight brushed the Persian carpet, Ethan finally rose. His body protested. He raked his hands through his hair, trying to piece himself together, but the old composure no longer fit. The gardens outside, still white with fresh snow, gleamed as though the night before had been nothing more than a terrible dream. But it was real, painfully real. A discreet knock sounded at the door. Patrick entered without waiting for an answer, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea. Dark shadows pooled beneath his eyes. He looked as if he had aged 10 years in a handful of hours. "I brought this," he said, handing Ethan a cup. "I assumed you hadn't slept." Ethan accepted it, but his gaze drifted to the crumpled newspaper tucked under his brother's arm. "What is that?" Patrick hesitated only a moment before offering him the paper. "It arrived just now. All of London is already talking." The headline struck like a blow. "Scandal at Stanhope House. The former Duchess returns with a hidden heir and accuses the Dowager Duchess of fraud." The blood drained from Ethan's face. "Dear God." Patrick leaned against the desk, tense. They know everything. Every word spoken in the ballroom. Someone talked, or several someones. Ethan read in heavy silence. The interrupted ball, Lucy's return, Robert Finch's confession, the horrified whispers. Benjamin wasn't named but described as a boy with unmistakably Stanhope features. Ethan shut the paper with a sharp motion. "This will destroy our mother," Patrick murmured. "Not only her," Ethan answered, jaw tight. "Lucy will pay for it too. Society feeds on scandal, and loves to blame her." His throat tightened. "I allowed this," he added, voice rough. "I became a part of it without knowing." Patrick didn't try to soothe him. He simply sat and drew in a long breath. "What will you do now?" Ethan felt the weight of the morning settle on his shoulders. "I want to see her. I want her to tell me everything. How she survived. Where she's been. Why she never came back." Patrick nodded. "She let you see the boy yesterday. That wasn't an accident. She saw you didn't know." A gentle knock interrupted them. Mrs. Hartley appeared, taut with nerves. "Forgive me, Your Grace. Lady Lucy has requested breakfast in the Blue Room. I thought you might wish to be informed." Ethan stood at once. "She's awake?" "Only Lady Lucy. The boy is still asleep." Patrick tilted his head toward the door. "Go." Ethan straightened his rumpled coat in a useless attempt at order and walked down the cold corridor. Each step seemed to drag 4 years behind him. At the Blue Room door he paused, drew a breath and knocked. 3 soft taps. Sophie opened it. The tired face, the shawl wrapped over her creased dress, the watchful eyes. Everything about her said he was only entering because she allowed it. "Come in," she said, neutral, but quietly. Ethan stepped inside. Lucy sat on the bed, her hair loose around her shoulders, Benjamin sleeping deeply at her side. Sophie was there too, tucked into an armchair near the fire, still wrapped in last night's shawl, watching her sister with protective attention. Morning light washed through the room with almost cruel gentleness, too beautiful to hold so much hurt. Lucy raised her eyes when he entered. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning." Her presence, real, alive, close enough to touch, nearly undid him. Ethan forced a steady breath. "Lucy, we need to talk." Sophie straightened in the chair, her gaze instantly fixed on them. Lucy exchanged a brief look with her sister, not a plea, but a silent understanding. Sophie rose and moved to the chair by the window, close enough to step in if needed, far enough to give them space. Lucy smoothed the sheet around Benjamin before she spoke. "What do you wish to know, Ethan?" He swallowed. "Everything. How you survived. Why you never came back. Why you never sought your mother. Why Ireland." Lucy lowered her eyes, not in shame, but collecting strength. "I was thrown out of this house believing you had rejected me," she began. "I packed in silence, and when I found myself outside, I realized I had nowhere to go." Ethan's stomach twisted. "You could have gone back to your family." Lucy let out a soft, humorless laugh. "And be seen in Bath as the discarded wife? Society would have destroyed my mother. And Sophie. My presence there would have been a burden." Sophie nodded, tension in her posture. "I knew where she was," she said, speaking for the first time. "But—" her gaze met Ethan's, steady. "Lucy begged me not to tell you. She said if you truly had rejected her, it was better to disappear completely." Lucy went on. "Ireland was the only way out. My mother had a distant cousin near Galway, a kind, simple woman. I just wanted to vanish, to start over and never look back." Silence settled. "And Benjamin?" Ethan asked, his voice frayed. Lucy laid her hand on the sheet beside her son. "I discovered the pregnancy weeks after arriving in Ireland," she said quietly, but with steady resolve. "I was alone, with no resources, no explanations, and I believed that you had cast me aside, that those words were yours." The world tilted beneath him. "Lucy, I never wrote that letter. I never received yours." Before she could answer, Sophie shifted in her chair. Her expression wasn't only protective now, it carried its own burden. "Lucy knows that now," Sophie said, looking straight at him, "because someone finally told the truth." Ethan frowned. "Who?" Sophie took a slow breath, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Finch." At the sound of the name, Lucy's fingers tightened in her lap. Ethan went very still. "He came to me 3 months ago in Bath," Sophie continued, her voice calm, but full of something long held back. "I was at the bookshop I always go to, and I saw him standing across the street, as if he'd been wrestling with himself before approaching. When he finally did, he looked shattered." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Finch confessed," Sophie went on, "that he delivered the forged letter himself, that he watched Lucy's face fall apart, and that from that day on he hadn't slept a single night without hearing her voice asking for answers. That he couldn't give." Ethan's hand rose to his mouth, stunned. Sophie finished, quieter now. "He came to me because he knew I was the only one who could reach you, and because, even drowning in guilt, he still feared facing you. Finch asked for forgiveness, not for himself, for you, Lucy." Lucy drew a long breath, fighting to keep her composure. Ethan, though, looked on the verge of breaking. "He came to me before dawn and told me the same thing," he murmured, voice hoarse. "Every word. The same." Lucy finally met his eyes. "For 4 years that lie was the only truth I had," she said softly, yet with a devastating clarity. "When Sophie brought me Finch's confession, I realized my story might have been stolen, not only by what they took from me, Ethan," her voice trembled, "but by what they stole from you as well." For a moment the room itself seemed to shrink around them. Then Sophie, still standing close by, lifted her gaze and asked, "Ethan, and Finch, what will happen to him now?" The Duke drew in a breath. Pain remained in his eyes, but his decision was set. "He won't stay at Stanhope House," he said. "He confessed and he will face the consequences. I won't hand his name to the papers, but he will not serve here again. I cannot keep under this roof a man who helped drive you out, Lucy, even if he acted under orders." Lucy nodded slowly. There was no hatred in her expression, only a worn, steady sorrow. "That's fair," she said quietly. "What happened cannot pass without consequence." Ethan took a step closer. "And why come back, specifically last night, at the ball?" Lucy lifted her chin. "Because all of society believed I was guilty, because they whispered that I had abandoned my husband, because I was tired of living in hiding while my story was twisted into something I didn't recognize." Her voice grew steadier. "And because Benjamin deserves to grow up free of lies." Ethan closed his eyes, overwhelmed. When he opened them again, Benjamin was stirring beside her, waking slowly. Lucy touched his shoulder gently. "Good morning, my love." The boy blinked, drowsy, until he saw Ethan. A shy smile appeared. "Father, you are my father, right?" Ethan couldn't stop the tremor that ran through him. "Yes, I am." Benjamin stretched his arms toward him. "Mother told me there are lots of horses here. Can you show them to me?" Lucy looked at Ethan, a silent permission. "A bridge." He smiled, voice thick. "I can if your mother agrees." Lucy drew in a breath, then nodded. "Only the stables, and Sophie will go with you." "As you wish," Ethan replied. Benjamin squirmed, suddenly very awake at the mere mention of horses, and Lucy leaned in to help him sit up. "My love," she murmured, "His Grace will show you the stables. Let's dress you first." The boy blinked slowly, but the promise of horses lit his face at once. Lucy helped him dress, the linen shirt, the warm little waistcoat Sophie tugged straight. the small blue coat already growing short at the wrists. She wrapped his scarf snugly around his neck and ran her hand through his dark hair, trying in vain to tame it. When Benjamin was ready, he ran to Ethan with short, eager steps. The Duke, as if handling something delicate and priceless, held out his hand with infinite care. Benjamin took it without hesitation. Lucy watched, the astonishing difference in size between those two hands, the instinctive ease of the gesture, and felt her heart tighten in a way she could not yet name. At the threshold, Ethan turned back to her. His gaze was serious, but free of demands. "Thank you for letting me be here today," he said quietly. "I promise I'll be careful. With him. And with you. No grand vows, no impossible pleas. Just respect." Lucy held his gaze for a brief moment. She didn't answer. But she didn't close herself off either, and that small, fragile opening was enough for something, almost imperceptible, to begin to shift between them. Ethan left with Benjamin's small hand in his, and Lucy let the breath leave her lungs slowly, like someone learning how to breathe all over again. Chapter 7. Between Fear and Hope. Lucy stood by the window of the blue room, watching the figures moving through the white gardens of Stanhope House. The cold morning light touched the fresh snow, turning everything into an almost unreal brightness. Ethan walked slowly, matching his pace to the small body skipping at his side. Benjamin pointed at something, a bird, a branch, or simply the wonder of it all, and Ethan bent his head to listen, patient. The ease of that scene struck her with quiet force. 4 years gone, 4 years that would never return. "He shows real affection," Sophie murmured beside her. Lucy didn't answer right away. She couldn't deny what she saw. Ethan seemed utterly absorbed in the boy, and Benjamin looked happy. But would that be enough to rebuild what had been shattered? How do you begin again after so long believing he hadn't wanted you? "He had no choice," Lucy said at last, her gaze still fixed on the window. "I'm the one who exposed him in front of everyone. What else could he do but accept it?" Sophie rested a gentle hand on her arm. "He could have denied it. He could have asked for proof. He could have sent us away last night." She drew in a breath. But he didn't. Lucy closed her eyes. Yes, that was true. Ethan had looked at Benjamin once, and that single moment had broken something in him. There had been no doubt in his face, no coldness, only pain, recognition, and tenderness. "I'm afraid," Lucy confessed in a whisper, afraid to believe again, afraid Benjamin will get attached only to lose everything all over. What if Constance finds another way to separate us? What if Ethan changes once the storm passes? "The future is always frightening," Sophie said softly, "but we can't live trapped by what might happen, only by what is in front of us. And right now, Lucy, Ethan is trying." Lucy nodded, though the movement was hesitant. Trying, yes. But good intentions alone were no longer enough for her. They moved back to the table, where the tea had cooled. Silence settled between them like a thin mist, until footsteps sounded in the corridor. A gentle knock broke the quiet. "Come in," Lucy said, even as her stomach tightened. The door opened slowly. Lady Constance Stanhope stepped inside. Nothing about her resembled the imperious matriarch from the night of the ball. Her dark grey gown was far too simple for a woman of her rank. Her face was tense but not broken, only tightly controlled. A harsh, rigid kind of control, almost metallic. Sophie rose at once. "You shouldn't be here." Constance inclined her head in the barest nod. "I am aware," she replied. Her voice was not soft, not repentant, just lower. "But Ethan has given me permission to speak with Lady Lucy, once, and only regarding last night's events." So that was it. Her presence wasn't spontaneous, not emotional, authorized, limited. Lucy drew in a steadying breath. "You may speak." Constance took 2 steps into the room. She didn't ask to sit. She didn't soften her gaze. If she was there, it wasn't out of humility. It was because she had no choice. "I have come to offer a formal retraction concerning past events," she said, as if delivering a prepared statement. Society is unsettled, and Ethan wishes matters between us to be clarified before any letters are sent. Lucy raised an eyebrow. A formal retraction? Yes. Constance didn't blink. I admit that my actions contributed to certain misunderstandings, and that your departure at the time might have been handled differently. Sophie let out a disbelieving sound. Anger rose in Lucy, not burning but cold, as she realized that even now this woman was still trying to control the narrative. My lady, Lucy said, her tone firm, there were no misunderstandings. There was a lie. Your plan. At last, a slight tremor touched the corner of Constance's mouth. I am not here to argue over details, she answered, only to record that I will not oppose your return. Ethan's decision is final. So this was it. Constance wasn't seeking forgiveness. She wasn't seeking redemption. She was trying to salvage what remained of her power. And where will you live if I do return? Sophie asked, her voice like ice. A brief hesitation, and then, Ethan requested that I retire to the widow's house, Constance began, each word carefully measured. Then she raised her chin just a fraction, as though trying to reclaim at least a shadow of her old dignity. But I considered the current climate in society, she went on, her tone still steady, though stripped of its old steel. With attention fixed on this scandal, remaining so close would only fuel rumors. A short silence followed. Therefore, I have chosen a more practical course. I will leave Stanhope House for an indefinite period and depart this afternoon for my residence in Bath. She took a breath, that rigid control hiding any crack beneath. There I will attend to my own affairs and will not interfere in anything concerning Benjamin or this house. Lucy studied her face. This was not remorse. It was strategic retreat. Then go, Lucy said, lifting her chin. Do what you should have done years ago. Stay away from us. Constance dipped her head, not in respect but in acknowledgement of defeat, and left without looking back. The door closed quietly, and the room fell into stillness. Sophie exhaled, tension uncoiling from her shoulders. She hasn't changed at all, Lucy answered without taking her eyes off the door. No, but she can't touch us anymore. For a few moments they stayed like that, saying nothing, until soft voices from the corridor drew their attention. They moved back to the window. Ethan and Benjamin were returning from the stables. Benjamin rode on his father's shoulders, laughing with all the carefree joy of childhood. Ethan held his small legs with careful hands, alert to every movement, and his face, the one Lucy had learned to love and later to fear, was lit by a smile she hadn't seen in years. Something shifted inside her. Small, precise, deep. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't forgetting, it was possibility. You still love him, Sophie murmured, not as a question, but as a simple fact. Lucy closed her eyes. A hot tear slipped free. It never stopped existing, she whispered. And that frightens me more than anything. Sophie squeezed her hand. Then let him know, let him fight for you both. Lucy opened her eyes again. She watched as Ethan came in through the side door, Benjamin still laughing on his shoulders. The scene etched itself into her mind, not as a wound this time, but as a memory of what once had been, and perhaps of what might one day be again. For the first time in 4 years, Lucy allowed herself to admit, if only in the quietest corner of her own heart, maybe the love she had thought dead had never truly died. It had only been waiting for a moment of light to breathe again. Chapter 8. The Vow. Ethan bent to lift Benjamin from his shoulders the moment they stepped into the main hall of Stanhope House. The boy was still laughing, cheeks flushed from running through the snow. Tiny flakes melted in his dark hair, strands that mirrored Ethan's with painful exactness. Can we see thunder again another day? Benjamin asked, tugging on Ethan's sleeve. Another day, yes, Ethan replied with a smile that rose without effort. But for now, you'll go upstairs, change out of these wet clothes and have something warm, then we'll talk. Benjamin nodded, still breathless. Can I tell Aunt Sophie? You may, Ethan said. Go find her. The child dashed up the stairs, calling for Sophie. His bright little voice echoed across the marble for a fleeting instant, and then faded. Only then did Ethan realize he wasn't alone. Lucy stood at the entrance of the side corridor, as though she had been watching for some time. The plain dress, the shawl hastily mended by the staff, the hair tied back in practical simplicity, none of it diminished the impression that she was the true axis of Stanhope House now. "He's happy," she said at last. "He is," Ethan answered, "and that's because of you." She didn't look away this time. "Not only me," she replied softly. "For the first time, he has you." Silence settled between them for a few breaths. Then Ethan steadied himself. "Lucy, we need to talk about what comes next, and about what's already inevitable." His gaze held hers, steady. "London is unsettled. Last night's ball is on every tongue, in every drawing room. Your name. Mine. Benjamin's." Lucy didn't flinch, only looked tired. Ethan continued, voice lower. "I can't control what they say out there, but I can control what happens in this house, and that's what I want to settle with you." She nodded slowly. "I'm listening." He stepped closer, careful to keep respectful distance. "My mother leaves for Bath today," he said. "Her trunk has already been sent ahead, and the carriage will depart before midday. She will stay there as long as necessary. She will not return without your consent, nor approach Benjamin without your permission. In this matter, consider everything resolved." Lucy absorbed the information, her lips pressing lightly together. She visited my room, not out of remorse, because she had no other choice. Still, she admitted she wouldn't oppose my return. "She knows she's lost," Ethan said plainly. "And for the first time she's learning what it means to live with consequences." Lucy crossed her arms, as if bracing herself. "And the staff?" she asked carefully. "Those who remained silent?" Ethan drew a breath. "I've already handled what needed to be handled," he said, choosing each word with care. "Finch is gone. As for Mrs. Hartley," he paused, "I believe she acted more out of fear than malice, and she has been important to Benjamin." "But she will stay only if you feel comfortable." Lucy thought for a long moment. "I don't want unnecessary punishment," she said quietly. "Only truth from here on. If she can offer that, I see no reason to send her away." Ethan nodded, a subtle relief passing through him. "So it will be." A slight ease settled in the air, fragile but real. He went on, "As for you, and Benjamin, I need to be clear." His tone shifted, taking on a formal weight. "In the eyes of the law, you never ceased to be my wife. There was no annulment, no divorce. That means you are and always were Duchess of Stanhope." Lucy flinched, only slightly but unmistakably, at the weight of the title. "After what the papers printed, I'm not sure I can be the Duchess they expected me to be," she murmured. "Nor do I want you to be," Ethan said. "And after the way they exposed you, no one should expect you to step back into your old place as if nothing happened." His voice softened, honest, unvarnished. "I don't want the Duchess shaped by society's demands. I want the woman you've become. If you choose to resume the role publicly, receptions, appearances, the season, I will support you fully. But if you prefer discretion, if you wish to rebuild at your own pace or focus only on Benjamin for now, that will be respected." His eyes gentled. "I will not push you back into the center of a society that fed on your suffering." Lucy inhaled slowly, as though the idea itself was something she had never imagined possible. "And Benjamin," she asked, "what do you intend to do for him?" Ethan straightened, and there was something almost ceremonial in the resolve that settled on his features. "First," he said, "I will recognize him publicly as my heir. Today, I will send letters to our solicitors and the parish. The record will be made properly with date, name, lineage. Benjamin Stanhope will not be a whisper. He will be a fact." Lucy's eyes glistened dangerously. "That will expose him even more." "That will protect him," Ethan corrected, firm but gentle. "When a name is recognized, it stops being rumor and becomes truth. And as for me, it's the least I owe my son. No one will treat him as a bastard, a shadow, or a living scandal. Not while I draw breath." Something inside Lucy loosened, just a little, but enough to let her breathe deeper. "And what about me?" she asked quietly. "I don't mean the title, I mean my place. Where do you see me, Ethan?" He looked at her with unwavering seriousness. "I see you wherever you choose to be," he said. "No ornament, no romantic flourish, only truth. If you want separate rooms, you will have them. If you want to stay in the blue room, no one will move you. And if one day you wish to share what was once the Duchess's chambers, it will be because you chose it, not tradition, not duty. What we had was broken. Whatever comes next cannot be a repetition. It must be something new, if it comes at all." Lucy was silent for a long moment. The words settled into her in layers she wasn't ready to touch yet. "I don't blame you anymore for what wasn't your fault," she said at last, with quiet difficulty. "But it still hurts. And I don't know how long it will stay." "I'm not here to fight your pain," Ethan replied softly, "only to stand near it while it softens, if you allow me." Footsteps sounded on the upper landing, followed by a bright voice. "Mama, Papa, Sophie said I can come down." Benjamin appeared on the staircase, already in dry clothes, his hair tamed as best as possible. He ran down a few steps, then halted when he saw them together. "Can we see thunder again after lunch?" he asked, leaning toward Ethan. Lucy looked at her son, then at the man before her. The past was still there, pulsing, but the future was beginning to take shape. "After lunch," she answered, "and only if you behave for Mrs. Hartley." Benjamin nodded with earnest excitement. Ethan offered his hand. The boy took it without pause. Before escorting him toward the side door, Ethan turned back to Lucy. "I'll send for the solicitor today," he said quietly, "for her alone. Benjamin will be recognized in everything that is his by right, and as for you, I won't make promises I cannot keep. But everything that depends on my will, Lucy, will move toward keeping you both here, safe, and, if time allows it, toward happiness." She didn't speak, but the way she looked at him, without the ice of before, without the full height of her walls, was a small vow of its own. A vow that she would no longer run from what she felt. She would simply walk slowly. He left with Benjamin, their steps echoing toward the gardens. Lucy remained in the hall, listening as those footsteps faded, and realized something had shifted quietly, irreversibly. For the first time since she had stepped back through Stanhope House's gates, she wasn't facing only a reckoning. She had a future, uncertain, yes, but finally hers to choose. Chapter 9. Rebuilding from Ruins. 3 weeks had passed since the Christmas ball. 3 weeks in which Stanhope House had stopped being the stage of a scandal, and slowly, quietly, begun to feel like the birthplace of something new, fragile, tentative, threaded with small possibilities. Lucy sat in the library, a book open across her lap, though her eyes had not moved beyond the second line all morning. The fire crackled behind her, spreading warmth through the room, but it was the window that kept stealing her gaze. Outside, Benjamin was laughing, that bright, bubbling laugh only children possess, while hurling snowballs at a hat balanced on a makeshift branch. Every hit was celebrated with such pure delight, it seemed to warm the very snow beneath his boots. A few paces away, Ethan watched him with quiet attention. He applauded, encouraged, knelt to adjust the boy's stance, patient, careful, wholly absorbed in the moment, as if trying one day at a time to reclaim the 4 years taken from them. That ease, father and son moving together as though they had never been torn apart, pressed against Lucy's heart with a blend so delicate and so painful she hardly knew how to breathe around it. Loss, tenderness, and something she feared too much to call hope. In those 3 weeks, Ethan had kept every word he had given her. He took breakfast with Benjamin each morning, led him to the stables each afternoon, read to him each night, and with Lucy, he was gentle, present, never intrusive. He spoke to her as one handles something precious, not clutched tightly in a fist, but carried with open hands, careful not to bruise what was left of her trust. Small gestures, steady ones, unmistakable. Sophie's voice stirred the quiet behind her. He's very good with Benjamin." Lucy turned. Her sister stood in the doorway watching the same scene. "He is," Lucy murmured. "More than I ever expected him to be." Sophie crossed the room and settled in the chair beside her, lifting the hem of her dress before she sat. "And with you?" she asked gently. Lucy hesitated. "He's trying, carefully. Sometimes he looks almost afraid of coming too close." A faint smile touched Sophie's lips, a smile full of understanding. "And you, Lucy? Do you want him to come closer?" The question was soft, without judgment. Just the tender clarity of a sister who saw more than Lucy ever admitted aloud. Lucy closed her eyes for a moment. For weeks that question had hovered at the edges of her mind, too fragile to touch. When she finally spoke, the words came out in a whisper, honest but not broken. "Sometimes I think it isn't fear," she murmured. "It's the wish to begin again. I just don't know where to start." Sophie gave her hand a gentle squeeze, steady, warm. "Lucy, you faced the worst life could offer. You survived. You raised Benjamin. You stayed whole. Perhaps now it's time to live what's possible." Lucy let out a slow breath, as if something inside her, not fear but hesitation, shifted at last. "Maybe it is," she admitted. "Maybe I want something more than survival." Footsteps sounded softly in the corridor. The door eased open and Patrick slipped inside, snow still clinging to his hair, carrying 2 steaming trays of tea. "I thought it might be a bit cold in here," he said, smiling. "It's warmer than outside, my lord," Sophie replied, lifting a brow, bright with amusement. Patrick seemed ready with a clever retort, but faltered the moment their eyes met, her gaze steady, curious, quietly assessing. A faint flush crept into his ears. "Well," he said, clearing his throat as he set the trays down. It seemed wise to bring reinforcements. Sophie accepted the cup he offered. For one brief second their fingers touched, a small second, but enough for Patrick to straighten as if he'd stumbled, and enough for Sophie to glance away a heartbeat too quickly to be accidental. Lucy didn't comment, but she noticed. Patrick gathered himself, then looked toward the window. "Benjamin is becoming quite the marksman," he observed, folding his arms. "If he keeps this up, we'll have trouble once he starts practicing with stones." "Don't you dare put such ideas in his head," Sophie warned, feigning sternness. "I wouldn't dream of it," he promised, raising both hands in surrender. "But if he ever wishes to ride like a true Stanhope, I'd be honored to teach him." Sophie arched a brow. "You'll teach him only if I supervise." "I would never object to your supervision," Patrick replied, far too lightly to be innocent. Lucy nearly smiled. Nearly. There was something new in the air between Sophie and Patrick, subtle, tentative, and strangely comforting. Patrick turned back toward the door, smoothing his coat. "I'll leave you, ladies," he said, bowing lightly. "If you need anything, I'll be nearby." Sophie nodded, and the door closed quietly behind him. Silence settled, not heavy, but open. Space, not tension. Sophie rose and moved to stand beside Lucy by the window. "He seems happy," she murmured, watching Benjamin play. But Lucy barely heard. Something outside had captured all her attention. Benjamin now rode atop Ethan's shoulders, arms stretched wide like wings, laughing as Ethan spun him gently, as though helping him fly. Lucy drew a breath, and something inside her finally gave way. "Sophie," she whispered, eyes still on them. "I think I'm tired of being afraid." Her sister took her hand again, squeeze warm and certain. "Then stop being afraid," she said, clear and sure. "Not everything that falls breaks. Sometimes it blooms." The words lingered as Lucy descended into the garden. The snow softened beneath her boots. The cold morning air cleared her thoughts. Benjamin spotted her first. "Mama, I hit so many times." "I saw," she said, smiling. Ethan set the boy down gently. For a moment he seemed caught between his son's excitement and the quiet hesitation that still lived inside him. Lucy stepped closer. Inside, she trembled. Outside, she held her ground. "Ethan," she began, gathering all the courage she owned, These past weeks have shown me something. You're trying, truly trying. And she swallowed. I want to try as well. His eyes widened, as if her words struck him and blessed him at once. Try? He repeated softly. Us, she said, not out of duty, not for appearances, not even for Benjamin. Try it because there may still be something worth building between us. The wind moved between them, but it didn't disturb what was taking shape. Ethan stepped forward, slowly, and lifted his hands, pausing just inches from her arms. May I? Lucy nodded. He embraced her, not tightly, not with desperation, but with reverence. A quiet, careful embrace, full of emotion, long held and finally allowed to breathe. Lucy yielded slowly, resting her forehead against his shoulder. His familiar scent, the warmth of his body, the distant echo of Benjamin's laughter, everything folded into that single moment. Thank you, Ethan whispered. I'll honor every step you take toward me. Lucy closed her eyes. One day at a time, she murmured. One day at a time, he echoed. And when they stepped apart, something in Ethan's expression had returned, something he had lost 4 years ago, and something in Lucy had finally loosened, something she had been carrying far too long. Benjamin called for them, and Lucy drew a long breath. For the first time since she had walked back through the gates of Stanhope House, she felt she wasn't walking back into the past. She was walking towards something new, something that, with time, might finally be called home and perhaps love again. Epilogue, 1 year later. The morning was gentle, as Lucy paused before the iron gates of Stanhope House, the very gates that 1 year ago had risen before her like a fortress set against her return. That day, she had crossed them with her heart unsteady, Benjamin small at her side, and a silent storm churning inside her. Now soft clusters of lilac wisteria draped gracefully over the dark metal, casting delicate shadows across the gravel path. Beyond the gates, the garden had become a mosaic of new colors, climbing roses, daffodils, tulips. Spring, once an impossible dream, now unfurled without hesitation. Between that winter and this spring, there had been long nights of conversation, whispered apologies, moments of fear and new laughter shared at the dinner table. Nothing grand, simply a steady accumulation of small beginnings. Benjamin tightened his grip on her hand. Mama, can I go see Thunder? He asked, restless, eyes bright. Lucy smiled. He had grown in ways deeper than height. Steadier posture, quiet confidence, easy laughter, all the things he had been denied for so long. You may, she said, adjusting the scarf around his neck, but wait for your father. I'm already here. Lucy lifted her gaze. Ethan was walking toward them from the garden path, coming from the stables. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms marked by honest work these past weeks. The wind had tousled his dark hair. When he saw them, his expression softened with an ease that still disarmed her, as though each morning with them remained an unexpected gift. Benjamin ran to him. Ethan swept the boy up in a single effortless motion, spinning him once in the air. Benjamin's laughter rang out across the courtyard like a small, joyful bell. Go on, Ethan said, setting him down. Mrs. Hartley left oats for Thunder. Be back before luncheon. Benjamin nodded vigorously and dashed toward the stables. Ethan slowed as he reached Lucy, stopping just a few inches from her, close enough that his warmth rose to meet the cool garden breeze. You look serious, he said gently. Lucy glanced back at the gate, then at the house, and for a moment she saw her past self crossing that threshold a year ago, exhausted, guarded, carrying more fear than hope. But now, peace lived where panic once had. I was remembering the day I returned, she murmured, how everything felt heavy, beyond repair. Ethan touched her cheek with the lightest brush of his fingers, a gesture reverent, never presumptuous. And now? Lucy took his hand in hers. Now, she said, a smile blooming warmer than the spring sun. I feel that this is home. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, as if those were the most cherished words he had ever been given. A full year of quiet reconstruction lay behind them, a year of listening, of mending, of effort offered freely, of love rebuilt not in declarations, but in daily choices. He drew her into his arms, firm but gentle. "I love you," he whispered, as he had whispered every morning and every night since she'd returned. Lucy rose on her toes and kissed him softly. "I love you too," she answered, and in her voice there was certainty, peace, and choice. They stayed wrapped in each other, while the breeze carried the scent of new blossoms across the garden. In the distance, Benjamin's laughter drifted from the stables, clear, bright, living proof of all that had been restored. On the side path, Patrick and Sophie walked together, speaking animatedly about the small summer ceremony they were planning, their ceremony. Sophie's laughter skimmed across the yard like a ribbon of light, and Patrick, unable to hide it, leaned closer every time she spoke, as though each of her words mattered more than the last. Their affection was quiet, steady, unmistakably mutual. Beyond these walls, London continued its noisy rhythm, but the Stanhope scandal, so fierce that winter night, had faded like a storm that had spent its rage. For months society papers speculated, twisted stories, tried to paint Lucy as martyr one week and villain the next. But truth, held steady by time, by Ethan's unshakable stance, and by Lucy's quiet dignity, outlasted every rumour. The Christmas ball incident had been a tempest, now it was only a distant echo, powerless to undo what they had rebuilt. From Bath came only occasional news of Lady Constance, a woman who had learned far too late that pride warms no empty house. Ethan slipped an arm around Lucy's waist, drawing her nearer as though anchoring this moment before it slipped away. The simple ring on her finger, the ring he had placed there once more months earlier, when he asked for her hand again, caught the soft spring light. The family he had almost lost was here, not perfect, not untouched, but whole, real, alive. The winter they survived belonged to the past, and spring, at last, had found Stanhope. And in finding Stanhope, it had found its way back to their hearts,